activities you can have your early finishers do in your science class this year. All of these activities are going to be things that help students improve critical thinking, that help improve classroom community, help build up their scientific skills, get them thinking about inference, and they can double as brain breaks and warm ups for your class as well. What's the story slides have students use the skills of observation, inference, critical thinking, connecting dots, data collection, and have them practicing dissecting images, all skills that are helpful to them when it comes to testing time and helpful when it comes to figuring out new information. So a what's the story activity, it's basically just a picture of an event out of context, and students are coming up with hypotheses about what was happening before the picture was taken, what would have been happening while the picture was being taken, and what would have been happening directly after the picture was taken. They're essentially writing a story. So in addition to being a good practice of like inference and data collection, it's also reaching students who are a little bit more artistic minded, who are more storytellers and don't really feel as much of a connection to science. This feels way more comfortable. So it's an activity that practices scientific skills without feeling super sciencey for your students. To have a what's the story for the week and have it posted somewhere in your classroom. And then if a student finishes early, they can work on their what's the story. They can work on it as a picture. They can work on it as a written story. They can work on it in a variety of different ways so that you're reaching students from a variety of backgrounds and a variety of interests. You're giving them choice in how they spend their time when they finish an assignment early, because I do think that that's something important to remember when it comes to talking about early finishers is we don't want students to feel punished for getting done early. And often when we're assigning just extra work or busy work, that's what happens. Students feel punished for getting done early. It decreases their motivation to try. And sometimes they even stop turning in things as often because since they stop doing it as quickly, sometimes you just stop doing it. This is something that feels more fun and collaborative. You can have classroom discussions about it. And that's also an opportunity to build in community. It also helps you get to know your students more because as they come up with different stories, they come up with their illustrations, you get sneak peeks into their backgrounds and kind of their personalities. Crunch Time Creations is a similar vibe where students are going to be practicing those same skills, community oriented, and you have a lot of good discussions about. And it's really getting students used to thinking outside the box and that there are no right answers. There's just your best effort, your best thought. And that is a skill that is super, super, super needed in science class, but students are so nervous about. So often, kids are afraid of sharing their ideas, afraid of sharing their thoughts on open-ended questions because they are so used to there being a right and a wrong. Crunch Time Creations is an activity that very clearly does not have a right or wrong. Use it for early finishers in the similar way as to what was discussed with What's the Story slides. You make one for the week and it's kind of like a competition, friendly competition, or just like have classes vote on who has the best crunch time creation. Now, the way crunch time creation works is students are given two random objects and asked to think about how they could combine those objects to make a new invention. Jason Reynolds did a similar activity over on Instagram when students were home for COVID and got a lot of good engagement from students. It's also very similar to something that the United States Patent and Trademark Office suggests for having students think outside the box and think creatively when it comes to inventing something else. I went to one of their remote PD sessions and they talked about taking an item that already exists and changing like a feature or thinking about other ways it could be used. This is similar to that as well, and I'll include in the description a link to the USPTO education site. If I can find a video where Jason Reynolds did this with students, I'll link that as well. But it's a really fun activity. It's a really good activity to get students thinking outside the box. Initially introduce it inside of a warm-up. So like it's the beginning of class or it's a brain break, and they have on a timer to think of what their new invention is because we don't want them to necessarily be overthinking. So they have 3-4 minutes to think of an invention and they're sharing out and collaborating. If you use this at the beginning of the year, you could even use it as a community builder for your students and having them get to know each other by thinking of an invention at a table and drawing up schematics and that sort of thing. And the USPTO resources will be really good for helping with that as well. For your early finishers though, you would have whatever your Crunch Time Creations prompt was for the week, and you have done the warm up and it just continues to live in your classroom somewhere. So wherever maybe you posted the What's the Story slide for the week, the next week you're doing a crunch time creation for your early finishers and that's posted in the same place. And so students can submit their CrunchTime creations all week long. Similarly, it can be something where they can write about it, they can draw about it, they can video record about it, whatever. And giving them that choice, which is also going to increase the number of students who actually partake in your early finisher activity. You can use some of the CrunchTime creation ones that are inside of that bundle. If you have that bundle or you are in Rockstars, you automatically have access. And it's also in the back to school bundle. If you don't have that, you can truly just use a random object generator and pick 2 random objects. And you can even kind of lengthen this out to where you have students submit their suggestions one week, vote on some of their favorites the next week, have like a top 2 or 3, and have students submit different mock-ups. And from there, they can use those mock-ups to create bylines or mottos for like the company that would create that invention. And so you can incorporate this into your classroom in a lot of ways. And in the conversations that come from it, that's community building. And by adding these different aspects to it, you create multiple lanes of access and multiple roads into doing this activity. So a student who maybe didn't feel super comfortable with the invention portion might feel more comfortable with coming up with like an ad copy for it or something, right? And this can further tie in to your curriculum. So maybe a little bit later in the year, you do a project where you're having students come up with an item related to whatever it is you're studying. For example, I would have a project where students were the CEO of a pickle company and would have to consider if whole pickles, spears, or chips would be pickled the fastest, and versus like basically the amount of time they were spending making pickles versus how much money they were taking in, et cetera, et cetera. So if we were doing a project like that and they were like into their CEO bag, they might want to come up with a motto for their company. This can tie into that. It just gets students more tied into the classroom, more excited about what's going on in the classroom. There's also an activity that I did towards the end of the year that was the STEM Innovation Challenge, and students were coming up with products. And so having done this activity all year long would feed into that activity at the end of the year because students are more used to it. And again, it's an early finisher activity that can also double as a brain break or a warm up that does not feel super sciencey. It's giving their brain a shift off of what they're actively learning so that in the back of their brain, their subconscious brain has time to gather what they're learning, synthesize it, understand it, and store it back in their long-term memory. And they're again understanding that you see them as whole people and not just little automatons that are there to be poured into. It's also positioning them as experts, as inventors, and all those good things are great for cultivating a classroom where students are independent and lead their own learning. The third activity, which is one of the more science-specific ones, is going to help build up that scientific skill of sketching and modeling things out. So this is called Just Sketch It. It is also in that Brain Blast Critical Thinking bundle. And it's just images and having students practice sketching them out and capturing the actual details, not actually sketching it for like prettiness. This is more of a just straight up task. Students won't necessarily enjoy it as much as the other ones that we've discussed so far. However, it is a needed skill. And by practicing this on a regular basis, students get more comfortable with sketching, which only helps us out as you go throughout the school year. And so on the Just Sketch It slides that are inside that bundle, it talks about some tips for sketching, like think about it in the terms of shapes, about how they don't need to be good artists. It doesn't necessarily have to be pretty. So those are things you can do with students as well for those early finishers. It's also really good for if you have some time where you really do need to get into some content, but your students are kind of like, having them do is just sketch it, kind of calms the room down. It's adjacent to content, and while they're doing it, you can perhaps be talking about some more content-y things while they're sketching, and you can just focus on something that they need to be learning about for your class anyway. Fourth activity is called Wiki Connect, and it is also about just like connecting the dots, critical thinking. Wiki Connect is like a Wikipedia racing game. So your school will have to be allowing students to use Wikipedia in order for you to do this. And so you have 2 topics and students start at one of those pages. And the goal is to get to the second topic, only clicking hyperlinked articles inside that original Wikipedia article. It's a game that I have played online a lot. There are a lot of free wiki racing games out there if you ever just want to play. However, I do like having the slide for in class because I can't control what prompts are going to come up and I'm playing a game online, right? Whereas I prefer to be able to control what the prompts are when I'm using it in the classroom just to make sure that they are age appropriate, and then if I want to do it to make it more content related, it is content appropriate. And in a future video, I'll talk about some ways that you can more so use this for review, but essentially it's just like connecting two different topics. It also is very helpful for spiraling and like for spiral review as you go throughout the school year. The last activity for our early finishers are puzzles. Those are also great for brain breaks. Now, just straight up jigsaw puzzles. I was notorious at my last school for always having puzzles out, and I like to have puzzles around the room. And I also like to have my own puzzle around like starting probably November, December, and all of second semester when students weren't quite as needy. And jigsaw puzzles do a lot of great things for students. They practice critical thinking, they practice observation, they practice image dissection. It's a lot of skills that are underneath doing a puzzle that students aren't realizing they're exercising, but are getting exercise. And something I have found is people will swear up and down they hate puzzles. Everywhere I've done this, the other teachers have been like, I don't really like puzzles. And then every time they came in my room, they would work on my puzzle. And then I would like go and find in their room and find that they were doing puzzles in there too, because it's really calming. I would also use it for like, okay, you are hyped up and you need to chill out, go work on the puzzle. Because it's something that like just takes up your brain space, your conscious brain, and kind of helps kids to cool off. And students also get really proud and really competitive about puzzles. But for the most part, the puzzles I had in my classroom were reused across multiple classes. And I would just have a station or two where puzzles could be done. And last year, I wasn't able to do it as much because I had a very large class and I just didn't have any table space, which made me a little sad. But what I ended up doing towards the end of the year was I just got some smaller puzzles with smaller pieces, and they could fit like within a very small tray, like a lunch tray type thing, and did it inside of that instead. Puzzles can be a great early finisher thing. Students are practicing scientific skills. They're practicing things that are going to help them to be successful in your class. But again, since it's not directly content related, it still feels like a bit of a break. And they aren't feeling punished for finishing early. You can also use those puzzles to talk through nature of science. So if you have the whole class work on jigsaw puzzles one day, you can talk through how sometimes you need a different view of something in order to discover what fits where, and how that relates to the practice of science and how different viewpoints in science make science richer. You can discuss how sometimes you can't see the full picture because you don't have all the pieces yet, and how science is ever changing because as we collect new data, as we add more pieces to the puzzle, we get a better picture of what's going on. You can discuss how sometimes you put a piece in the wrong spot and then you realize it's in the wrong spot and you correct it, and how that happens in science as well. So there are a lot of connections between jigsaw puzzles and the nature of science that come in super handy when you're using puzzles for brain breaks as well. I hope you found that super helpful. Let me know if you have any questions. And for more support in cultivating a classroom where students take the lead and where students are independent learners, make sure you come check out Rockstars. It is my instructional coaching group where you get access to all of my teaching resources, like everything that I've discussed in this video. You get access to all of my PDs, like the No More Captain Save a Student masterclass that's coming up August 30th, 2025, all about strategies to cultivate a classroom culture where students give their best effort, as well as a community chat space where you can drop questions about your specific classroom and what you specifically are struggling with and get individualized feedback from me inside of that space. If you have any questions, let me know. Check out the description for some links to the different things I discussed in this video, and stay curious, y'all.